Hello, everybody. I'm so thrilled to have Martha Eddy today for this new season of the Being Yoga podcast. It's such a pleasure to have you back and to share again, like around all those very meaningful topics that we will explore in this season. And I'm opening up with you today, Martha. So thank you for receiving and accepting the invitation to share your wisdoms.
It is such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
So before we dive into all the gifts and offerings and really understandings that you collected through the years, I would invite you to maybe facilitate a landing practice so that everyone, including myself, can be centered and present for the interview.
Absolutely. I'm so thankful for that as well. Becoming centered is part of being. So um, I was enjoying the idea of how do we deepen our listening. And I'd like to encourage us to first relax our eyes and then come into exploring our hearing and then how we move from hearing into listening. So I am closing my eyes right now. I am inviting you to either um, place your hands or elbows on a table in front of you or on your lap, or just lift your arms to your eyes and palm. And palming means putting the heel of your hand on your cheekbones and crossing your fingers over your forehead and cupping your hands so there's no pressure on your eyeballs. So the eyelids are down. You're starting to breathe more deeply. You're noticing what's in your visual field. For instance, it really ideally is black, giving our eyes what they need in order to be fuller receivers of light. So the retina, the back of the eye that absorbs photons, light particles or waves, comes into a deeper place of receptivity with darkness, periods of relaxation. And then when the light comes in, there's more activity in the pigment, the rhodopsin. So as you breathe in, you might even breathe in more deeply through the upper part of your nose, the canals, we call them, the various little kind of like shell-like structures, so that you're breathing into the area around the bony orbit of the eye. In other words, the part of the nose and the bones behind the nose that connect into the eye socket, massaging your eyes. And just take one or two more breaths, slowing down your exhale, enjoying the darkness, the relaxation, the easiness of your breath, the massaging of your abdomen, by your diaphragm. And now bring a little awareness to your cheekbones and know that your inner ear, the part of your ear that hears different tones and pitches, that makes connections to different sounds, is behind this cheekbone, this zygomatic bone, where your palm is resting. So by giving a little pressure to that eye bone, you're helping the bony orbit, the lower part of your eye socket, but also perhaps speaking to your inner and middle ear. Your outer ear is your earlobe and the entryway of sound vibration. Your middle ear is taking that vibration and transmitting it with a drum into the cochlea, the snail, that has so many nerve fibers that's going to send messages to the brain through the midbrain to the auditory cortex. So there's sound and there's meaning. So perhaps right now you just listen to the sound of my voice. Low sounds reverberating deep into the cochlea. Higher sounds. Hi, hello. Higher sounds coming in a little differently. And then there's the meaning of these sounds, these words. Perhaps they don't have meaning for you. Perhaps it's just the sound that you're enjoying, or the interpretation of the words. Perhaps my choice of words wants to be clarified, cleared for you. My choice of words could be working very well or could be confusing. So just notice the language and how your brain is perceiving that from the inner ear, through the tones, through the vibrations, to the meaning of language, the interpretations, the perceptions. And then gradually, keeping your eyelids lowered, if you will, I invite you to move your hands away, still hearing my voice and the changes in pitch and volume, but now relaxing your shoulders, your hands, and maybe moving your head and neck or your spine, and imagining you're some animal, favorite animal of yours, whether it's a little bird or a puppy or some other wonderful being that is listening for a sound and perks up its ears. Can you perk up your ears? And then soften your ears, relaxing. So it's as if you're searching, like trying to discriminate a particular sound, like what is that? Where is that coming from? Or just being with it without any sense of it needing to mean anything or needing to give you information. And just notice the tone of your head on your neck, the tone of your neck over your rib cage, your breathing, your diaphragm, your pelvis. If you're sitting on the floor, maybe over your thighs, on the chair, or if you happen to be standing or lying down, just noticing how the rest of your body is taking in sound and choosing to perceive what the sound means to you or not. And maybe let's end with a little hum, each of us humming on our own and feeling the vibration of sound. So our bones are awakening as well. Perhaps you feel that right now, just listening. This is to exaggerate that feeling of stimulating the ear with sound through the bones of our whole body. So play with pitch, low, middle, and high, and let's begin. So just short, just noticing, maybe do that one more time and then we'll come to our ending. and finding your ending with either a sound or a movement, or just gently, lightly fluttering your eyes open, being the animal that you are in the environment you're in, and just taking in any sounds you're hearing from the outside, from the inside, orienting yourself to be able to listen to this conversation, and perhaps first clearing by taking a moment to stretch or write down something that was important for you from what we just did. So I'll just be quiet for 10 seconds. And welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There are so many um, maybe thoughts, but feelings that came up really and echoed what I'm interested in these days, like eco poetry. Maybe you've heard about, yeah, this uh, kind of world really that I'm discovering and like decentering from the only humans vision to other animals or even vegetals visions, and how does like a rose spend their day and what are they seeing, hearing, listening to. And that's such an experience, a very profound one. And when you offer to embody and to tune into the feeling and the felt sense of how is that to be the animal that you like wow, yeah, very, very powerful. Mm.
Sweet. I can't remember the year, but I think it was the somewhere between 2005 and a, a program I was involved with 2007 called Seeds. And I wish I could remember how that acronym goes, but it definitely had to do with ecological, the word two E's had the word ecological in it. It was a festival at Earth Dance, which is a site that I have gone to for years and run both workshops for Moving On Center, our school in California, Oakland, as well as for my own dynamic embodiment somatic movement therapy trainings. In this case, they were doing a festival on working with ecology, and the D is dance. So it was the arts and ecological awareness, and they invited many, many different wonderful people. I was working on a curriculum, which was how to bring ecological awareness to children in schools, middle school and high school age children, so youth, um, using movement and some dance. We called it Eco Moves for Kids, and that's what I presented. And I bring this up because before that time, I had started to use the word ecosomatics. And I wasn't aware of anybody else using it. And then I found out my good friend Sylvie Fortin was also using the word. And she was using it to talk about the ecology of our culture, of the somatic culture. Who are the people? What are we thinking? And how do we relate to one another? And I leave it to her to, or your reading of her vast literature, to learn more about her use of the word ecosomatic. I was being more literal. I had read an article in a dance journal, dance education journal, the Journal of Dance Education from the United States. And I believe the article was by Rebecca Enghauser, and she called it eco listening. So it kind of relates to today and where we started, and being on a podcast, which asks us to listen. Um, and I loved it. It was this idea that we're listening with our bodies, that's what somatics is all about. Being somatically aware is a kind of listening as well as feeling. And yet I wanted, when I heard the word eco, I was like, oh, but there's also this attuning with the earth and all of its living beings. So the plant life, the trees, the mushrooms, so much more information and movies and music has developed from this whole field, as well as all the animal kingdom, and so much great writing on that. As a matter of fact, much more writing about animals as humans and humans as animals as well. So, one of the other projects I took on, and it came out of France, was I got an email from a person in France, Anne Moradian, happens to be an American but living in Paris, saying, would you write a chapter in a book on what they call childhood nature? And it's a one word. And when I say they, this was from a group of scholars from Australia, really looking at childhood as nature, humanhood as nature. And yet, this particular book with Springer Publishers was intended to really lift up what activities in education can be done that support children holding on to our connection as animals, as natural beings. So, a true investigation of ecosomatics,
Mm.
because for me, ecosomatics is caring about the earth and feeling our earthiness and our place as animals on the planet. So I loved writing this article. I love doing ecosomatic work. I love that the field has really grown. And Jamie McHugh, in particular, has been running a kind of ecosomatic, um, I'm going to call it, it's not a podcast, I believe it's a series of Zoom videos with different speakers on the topic. So I'm so glad you're interested in that as well.
Yeah, yeah. There are so many resources that you pointed to, and I've heard it. Yeah, maybe two of them, but not all of them. And I'm very curious in diving more into the field because, as you said, it's so vast and opening up more and more. As I guess maybe that's the bridge that I can see, and you'll tell me if this is the same for you. But really, the bridge between the individual and the collective, and how maybe somatic awareness can leads to a vaster and deeper understanding of ourselves, but also the need, like biologically, really, that we have towards our environment. And maybe somatic awareness facilitating this remembrance, really, that we are the planet and that the planet is made of us. So that's very beautiful that we can jump from one way to the other. Mm.
Absolutely. You bring up something that is so important. The idea of individualism is really a Western consciousness
Mm.
concept. And when I think of our collectivity in the somatic world, like who are we as somatic experts? And what are the different somatic disciplines? And I'd love to get back to that later. Um, I'm very aware that kind of the field developed at the turn of the 20th century. And so there is this sense that some of these are new ideas. And certainly the incorporation of maybe very precise anatomical concepts with exploration of the soma, the living body, uh, or working even with now what has evolved, the term neuroplasticity, which really is something that just describes what people like Moshe Feldenkrais and Mabel Todd and FM and Gerda Alexander, two separate Alexanders, were doing. They
Mm.
were bringing in neuroplasticity. They were helping us move in order to grow new brain connections and maybe in some cases new brain cells. So, what I'm getting at here is that collectivism got lost, not necessarily with somatics. I think we were bringing it back, although it's still done in a fairly individualistic way in some settings, like private one on one settings, and maybe even in classroom settings where everybody's having their separate experience guided by one or more teachers. Um, that as I was deeply in this field, and I'm thinking now this is around 1990s, and I'd already been involved with the field for 20 years. I'm like, why is this so predominantly white bodied people? What is going on here? So, one of the first things I did was start to interview the people that I knew that had actually spent time in other continents and been influenced them by them. So people who had been influenced by them that then brought that influence into the form of somatic movement in particular that they had developed. So for example, Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen had lived in Japan. And so her work in Japan highly influenced how she worked with bringing in one of the very first somatic systems to bring in the autonomic nervous system. Now everybody's involved with autonomic nervous system, especially because of the work of Bessel van der Kolk and really recognizing that the body and the nervous system are so important in healing. I was running a class called Calming the Nervous System long before everybody's doing these classes now. But because in body mind centering, we were working with really embodying our parasympathetic nervous system and as well as coming into a kind of confident sympathetic nervous system versus a fight flight anxious sympathetic nervous system. I'll say one more story there and then come back to the collective, which is that with that work of playing with the autonomic nervous system, the part of our body that is automatic, that we have a heartbeat, that we have breath. Um, with that, we knew that yogis had already actually brought what was considered involuntary into voluntary control. So it was so great to find out that Ida Rolf really studied yoga and that Irmgard Vartaniev also studied Qigong. So these were the influencers and the influences that I wrote about in an article on global somatics or the global influence on somatics. I presented it at a conference, the Congress on Research in Dance in 2000, and then it was published. So it was the beginning, I feel, of really recognizing the global South, the African continent through the work of Emily Conrad and Continuum,
Mm,
and Afro-Haitian influences, all being really predecessors and influencers of these Western approaches. And so now it's so beautiful because many of my students are saying, my grandmother's knowledge from Mexico or my grandfather's tradition of martial arts have taught me everything you're teaching me in somatics. And I guess my interest right now is to have each of those young people as well as the elders in their communities name if they were to do a Feldenkrais lesson or a body mind centering session or some kind of Traeger work or Hanna somatics, what do they find is different than what the shaman was doing in their area or that is built into the daily culture? What I can say, and this is coming back to our point, is that they all would say, we do this collectively and for the collective. And that is still not happening in the somatic field fully. It's beginning. And I think the eco-somatic work is indeed the bridge.
mm,
That is where we recognize we are all together.
mm,
And also in another area of somatic work, which is called social somatics. very much let's pay attention to the social collective or the social impact of society's oppressive forces. So,
Mm,
social somatics is a term that came from Jill Green out of the University of North Carolina in Greensboro. And that is the South of the United States where racism was rampant.
mm,
And she also had a feminist perspective, really looking at women and women's health and how um, unbalanced the lifestyle demands are, the conditions of choice and decision making, like you talked about before, who has authority in a situation, and what kind of authority can we afford people through the practice of somatics if we're not thinking about the social constructs that are so oppressive?
mm,
So that brings us back to the collective.
mm.
Yeah.
Definitely, and so needed, I think, because you're bringing up like this biosocial um, model, really, and biopsychosocial model that it really changed to me, like the perspective, like the tiny perspective that some field had and the other were having on their side, and like not communicating, like in the body, like health is communication. So how is that we've kind of split it, the parts of the body and the systems themselves, and in BMC, for example, okay, like we spend 1 week in the skeletal system. We kind of focus on it, but we also remind ourselves that it's nothing alone. Like it cannot exist in and of itself. It needs the rest. So I'm always yeah, feeling like angry and sad, like about how the global situation went into the splitted and uprooted, really understanding of humankind, but also life on Earth. And so I'm very grateful, and always like it brings hope back, to myself, like when I hear those conversations, and many great projects that we don't hear about much, sadly, or maybe not yet, I hope, but especially in the yoga world, because that's mainly my title, quote unquote, and my role, even though I'm very somatic inspired. But um, yeah, that like the individual and collective, as you said, as a teacher, who is teaching, who have access to becoming a teacher, who have access to the trainings, and who are the students. And yeah, it's really profound and culture provoking and thought provoking, really. So I'm very aware of those issues, because to me they are issues and systemic issues. And yet where are the strategies? Sometimes, it can feel very isolating as a job as well, to be aware, like on your own, of those huge questionings, and then like seeing very individualistic oriented yoga classes or brands, and I'm like, whoa, where are we going? So, and I know you've been there way longer than I've been, so I'm very curious about your understanding of like the evolution of the yoga world or the somatic world in and of itself, and if you have any maybe vision, shamanic vision of the future, or any hope maybe. Mm.
Absolutely. Wow, that's so many different thoughts went through my
I
head as you
know.
were speaking. I like to speak to social somatics. I'd like to
Mm,
speak to the different branches of
mm,
somatics that I identified in my book, Mindful Movement. I'd like to speak to holism and what has happened since, just what's going on now,
yeah.
an example of how somatics is influencing other fields. I just
Mm,
came from helping to organize a conference. Um, I was just invited to organize one track of a conference called Embodied Cognition.
mm.
Just happened 2 days ago at Yale University in New Haven, Massachusetts. Let me say that
You.
again. Just happened at Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut, outside of New York, and it was a bringing together of psychiatrists, psychologists, physical educators, dance educators, somatic specialists of both somatic movement therapy and somatic movement education, as well as, I would say, a lot of neuroscientists.
Mm.
So for me, it was profound to see many of these topics addressed in just one day in terms of what is going on for people with mental illness, which is so rampant in our world. What is going on for people that are veterans and survivors of wars, of having come back from fighting in various parts of our world, and where is there what we used to call, or still call, post-traumatic stress syndrome or disorder, and how is it being addressed at all through the body. So that conference really addressed education, it addressed mental health, it addressed performance and just our artistry, and how coming into the body more fully also impacts aesthetics through dance, through fencing, through sports. That all came out. And so I want to just take a moment and share from my book back to your talk, the idea of social somatics within the health arena.
Mm.
Because somatic movement, I'm just reading this little section, it's page 236 of one edition. Um, Somatic movement combines a mindful approach to movement. It can be meditative in nature and uses imagery. It has all the benefits of movement and exercise and includes an incredibly safe approach, moving slowly, with the teacher and student sharing my minute by minute feedback about their psychophysical experiences. However, as pointed out in prior chapters, somatic practices, whether somatic movement education and therapy, somatic psychology, or somatic body work, when practiced separately from physical therapy, social work, psychotherapy, or massage therapy, are often not part of the allied medical profession. For instance, within a country's health insurance or their medical systems. Health equity asks that all of humanity should have equal access to life-enhancing strategies. This ideally includes the wellness impact of somatic experiences. A component of social somatics is to work to counteract unequal access to health knowledge as well as to health practices. A starting place is within somatic education by making somatic sessions and sometimes somatic training more available to all. It's a challenge to provide affordable ways to receive somatic sessions. This goal is deterred further if one's cultural positions, whether they're alternative or non-allopathic healthcare, as a high-priced commodity. So if
Mm.
your culture positions these as a high-priced commodity, this is further exacerbated in the US by a system where therapeutic sessions are limited to 15 to 30 minutes. The implications of this go much further. They relate to cost, to time, to space. Do we have access to clean space? And to interpersonal processes. So I feel like you talked about that access, and this paragraph just weaves in the idea of the importance of somatics, but also how it's siloed, how it's separated from the overall medical field. So you can imagine this conference at Yale felt incredibly integrative and uplifting. It's a
Mm.
hopeful piece. It's bringing a sense of a new possibility. If we could change our medical system so that it includes more of this holism, that would be a big step forward.
Mm. So encouraging, really. Yeah, and also to like remove guilt or shame from the individual's shoulders as well, to remind ourselves that the systems aren't sustaining and supporting of our health in all levels. And so it doesn't mean because we are ill or we experience symptoms that it is our fault, or that we are not good enough, or that we are lower than. And also there are truths that yes, fragments of populations don't have the same access. And it's not because of their worth, it's because of the system's vision of their worth. And that is
Yes.
so needed to remember because, well, guilt and shame and any stagnant emotions are also a source of stress and stressors. And so increasing the illnesses themselves. So, it's a loop, really. And so I'm very grateful to hear about these kind of conferences. And I'm sure there are plenty of them, maybe more in the US than in France for now, but still, it's growing and it's more visible, and it's questionings that maybe because we are resourced a little bit more than before, thanks to the work that like the one that you've done through the years, that maybe we are ready now, or at least curious about asking those questions and willing to step by step and on our scale change some things. So that's very encouraging and yeah, hopeful. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Absolutely. We had three keynote speakers,
Mhm.
and one of them was Bessel van der Kolk, who is the author of Body Keeps the Score, which is about 10 years old, maybe a little older. And he really is staying very alive and vehement about one of the points that was made in his book about how all the research and data that they have on the different types of traumas and how PTSD doesn't diagnosis, which is a diagnosis in the United States that one can get treatment for now after much work, um, is not actually accurate for someone who is the victim, if you want to use that word, of child abuse, let's say, or someone who's a victim of sexual abuse. And so have developed a consortium of people, of psychiatrists and psychologists, and maybe some dance therapists, I would think, I would hope, have come forward with a new diagnosis, but it was not accepted. They thought it was too kind of complicated to explain what looked like a simple thing. And that was part of the response to the committee, that we're not going to add it to our diagnostic manual, which means that there are a whole group of people that aren't getting treatment in our medical system, at least an appropriate treatment of one type that actually is effective, that really understands the conditions of a person who's dealing with sustained abuse. And instead, they have to use different medical diagnoses to kind of patch together a program, which, if someone's not fully trained, might not even know how to do. So it's really a setback. And so that is another place of potential hope, is seeing these understandings of, first of all, the body as being a place of retained trauma response, and the need to bring in the somatic work, whether it is through a psychotherapist trained in more somatic work, or actually partnering with somatic movement specialists who get much more movement going than the typical somatic psychologist, who might just track breath and tension in the body in a more postural way, which kind of leads us to yoga. Those are two of the beautiful places that yoga really helps, right? Is getting into a posture and breathing into it. So getting into a posture and really using the breath to change and open and reveal oneself through that posture. But that's still different than the emotional expression that comes through movement, through shaping in the torso, which is not something I see aside from a total closed shape and a more upright shape in yoga is typical, that we might curl over in child's pose, or we might twist with an upright spine, or we might arch the back and come into possibly the experience of elation, of happiness from that, but very little nuanced changes of like postures of shame, postures of anger, postures of of confusion. And again, ultimately, I strongly believe the posture is the held place, but it's the movement through it that is so critical. And I personally, in my own form of body mind dancing, which evolved out of my studies with Irmgard Bartenieff and Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen, when I was teaching with both of them, it evolved even further. But even prior to teaching in their certification programs, the Laban movement analysis and the body mind centering certification programs, I'm one of the few people in the world that taught in both programs over 10 years. Um, and with the founders directly. Um, I think I'm the only person that's done that for many years. Um, Basically, there was such a need to move from understanding posture to really understanding movement. And these two systems are just brilliant ways of looking at movement. In dynamic embodiment, I combine them. So, for instance, the Laban movement analysis might describe the outer movement like, this person is rising and widening with a sense of um, strength and quickness. And so, which is different than rising and widening with ease and flow and sustained time. So, with those subtleties, we're getting into a different emotional states. You could rise and widen and then even retreat, and that would be the Moro reflex in its first phase of kind of fight flight, moving back into freeze. Or if you're doing it with ease, it could be the beginning of just, oh, this is such a great day. I am widening and I am floating upwards. So movement and the qualities of movement are tremendously important. And you asked earlier about what is different between yoga and some of the somatic movement work, and that would be a major difference for me. And I think it's scary to people. So I think yoga was really important as an entry point for people to come into the body if they knew nothing. It's kind of safe. I can hold this posture, I can breathe into it, I can open my body, I can open my chakras, which
Mm-hmm.
reminds me that my other book, together with Shakti Smith, is Dynamic Embodiment of the Sun Salutation, which is my personal practice since 1975, just to do the sun salutation in the morning. And I so appreciate the flow from posture to posture, but also the postures and the feeling of checking in as a kind of ritual. How does my knee feel today in warrior pose? How do I feel in my arms as I go into a plank, let's say, and then into the floor?
Mm-hmm.
How am I feeling in my heart when I begin and end the the sun salutation? So I'm going to pause there because that was a lot of different ideas, and I'd love to see what direction you might want to go in our final minutes.
Yeah, the one that comes up strongly is that really the shift of intention and how do we enter a posture, because we were talking about yoga as well, is that to achieve like a result that most of the time isn't even offered by the student themselves, but really like an external authority like the teacher mostly. So is it to do, achieve, model, control something or shape something, or do we enter a posture with inquiry, with curiosity, with like an open heart, mind, whole body systems, and just savor it? Like, is it comfortable? Is it not? Okay, if it's not comfortable, is there something else that we can add, remove, change, remodel, and readjust, and really reclaiming the power, as we said, because um, sometimes the settings can themselves kind of repeat and encourage systemic oppressions even without being aware of them or naming them. And I'm not blaming any teachers here because unfortunately not yet maybe, but in the trainings of yoga, trauma is never really named, or systemic oppression neither. So it's quite difficult to step back and to question our own profession as well. So it's very beautiful that you named and created a book in the sun salutation, a kind of reshaping, because it really is a tool that everyone and anyone can access to, maybe more easier than attending to a class, or and also it's kind of confronting really to go to a class and to show ourselves, to show up. So yeah, it's precious to have those tools and to be aware of those very, very intense and challenging and yet needed questionings. So I'm very grateful that you've done such a big work and such a very kind of precise and yet wide. Like that's the two adjectives, like the duality, the complementarity that I see in your work, like really precise and expert, really, and yet like so inquired and curious and wide. So yeah, thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you for the appreciation because it is an attitude of
Mm,
being open-minded,
mm,
of and I think it was a gift that I received by virtue of the fact that in the same year that I was introduced to Laban movement analysis and Irmgard Bartenieff, I was introduced to Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen.
mm,
So in the same moment, I knew there were two brilliant people in the world. So I didn't get caught in any kind of guru
mm.
kind of mentality.
Yeah.
How could you? You have two. So it
Mm,
was a real gift right away because I saw many people, even in the somatic field, looking to their
mm,
founder as a kind of authority and leader, and this is the only system that works.
mm,
So I was very thankful to James, also referred to as Jim Spira, who created our professional association, bringing the different somatic systems together. And that's also why I, in my book, both in Mindful Movement, I talk about the amalgam generation. So where those of us that studied different systems brought them together. Even Thomas Hanna would be one of them, as well as Peter Levine. I mean,
mm,
coming out of his own somatic movement work, moving into psychotherapy, bridging from the three branches. So we've got bridges within somatic movement, we've got bridges across disciplines. For instance, in dynamic embodiment, we are definitely doing very refined touch work, very skillful using BMC, but also Irmgard Barteniev's understanding of movement repatterning. So that meant how do you guide people through space with shaping through their torso in a sequence that flows? And she taught that as part of her Bartenieff fundamentals of movement. So we've got in dynamic embodiment, these two types of somatic movement that both have incredible touch practices, body mind centering, working with how do you touch the autonomic nervous system and feel into its rhythm? How do you work with cranial sacral rhythm through the cerebral spinal fluid? And I went on to study cranial sacral touch work as well as lymphatic drainage and massage for the blood flow. So my students are getting a perspective of
mm,
where they can go for more information, but also models of touch that I call dynamics of touch. Are infusing and bringing in the BMC perspective of embodiment, but also the touch practices that have been well developed for specific body systems. Um, Related to that, though, coming back to the chakras and yoga and the beauty of what can open up in a posture, is again starting from there, starting from breath, as does much somatic psychology, and then partnering with those of us in particular that have gone on and are involved with dance. So that's another feature of dynamic embodiment, is that you don't have to be a dancer, but everybody does dance as part of the training. You don't have to choose to go to a lot of the dance classes, but they're designed, body mind dancing is designed for the lay public. During COVID, people were coming to body mind dancing to do exactly what you were describing before, which is to move the energy, to go from fear, to go from isolation or loneliness into group activity, to move from exhaustion and frozen states into mobile expressive states. And I have two models in dynamic embodiment that are explained in dynamic embodiment of the sun salutation, just to see how to take the sun salutation and adapt it for different syndromes like exhaustion of the adrenal glands or not being able to sleep from the pineal, or um, adapting because the knees are hurting or a joint is achy. And I work with cancer patients, so it's not always just arthritis, but arthritis caused by the treatment drugs for sustaining life. So there are so many people that have joint pain.
Mm.
So within the dynamic embodiment system, we understand movement and touch. We work with individuals to observe, and this is back to what you were saying. What is it that motivates them? What is it that they're bringing forward? And how do we match that? And this would be in a private session, but we also do it in body mind dancing in the dance classes. Everybody speaks, even if it's in a small breakout group first, coming back with what are they feeling? What is it you want? And then the teacher facilitates, even if they have a lesson plan or an idea of what movement they want to do, they then infuse it with the language and the intentionality of the student body, the people that are coming together, the clients, so that people feel met and also are being met in where they are. So this is coming from, meeting people where they are, which is something that has been the baseline of body mind centering for over 50 years. So I thank you for that, for really recognizing, and I speak about that a lot in mindful movement. For me, to be somatic is to follow the soma, the living body, which means the agency is in the person, and within that, within the body part that's perhaps out of balance, and also in the cells themselves. The cells of the body are part of the self. And it is possible that because of trauma, we have forgotten, we have frozen, we have distorted experience. And so the other piece of dynamic embodiment is that we have on our faculty people that are trained mental health workers. And so they're teaching us to be trauma informed. And they're teaching us what we can do as somatic movement educators and therapists, which is in dynamic embodiment, we know how to help people regulate. We know sometimes how to help them, not because that's what we're trying to do, because it just happens in a movement session, which is, I think, why some people prefer yoga. When
Mm.
you get into movement, your trauma may reveal itself
Mm.
because you're moving through new places. And then all of a sudden, a certain position may remind you of a certain oppressive experience, whether it's a look in the eye or a deferential placing in space. One person's below the other. Any of those kinds of issues are critical in need to be the practitioner or teacher, whether you're teaching groups or individuals, needs to be aware that these things may come up in their sessions. So I think I was one of the very first people to write about emotions as they come up in dance classes, and that dance educators need to be trained to be ready for that, as our dance movement therapists who are then going to work with it psychodynamically. We just need to be in our somatic movement world ready to be present and accepting of emotions, not
Mm.
scared of
Mm.
them, and then be able to refer people to the people to do deeper work, but also to help regulate them so that they can be ready. And I can't tell you how many somatic psychologists have turned to me to be on panels and at conferences in order to share more about the body because they
Mm.
really don't know as much as we do about the body.
Mm. Definitely, like regulating ourselves as facilitators, and then therefore, as you said, we don't have to make it until, fake it until it happens. Not at all. Like just because you are where you are, centered, then you just meet the other people where they are as well, and they feel mirrored in their possibility to be regulated. So that's very beautiful. And thank you, Stephen Porges, as well for the polyvagal theory as well. And that's very yeah, eye-opening and beautiful that we can step into the biology and the psychology and the social context in which everything is woven together, and even the environmental context itself. So that's layered and then one. That's yoga, right? So, so I'm very grateful. And that's
And
why I will link everything like your bio, your website, your books as well, and the trainings as well in the show notes, because I really encourage the audience to go check this out. It's very important.
thank you so much for that. Yes, we have classes if you just
Yeah.
want a 1 hour class, and that includes
Mm,
the eye work we started with
yeah.
as well as dance,
Mm,
and also workshops on the
yeah.
body, like the
Mm,
shoulders or the gait or walking and how your knees are feeling. But then we also have workshops that can be 3 hours or can
mm,
be 12 hours. And then and many are prerequisites for joining the training program. So it's a great way to get to know it. And then the training
mm,
program is Meta, which is our professional association
mm,
certified.
And it's both in person and online, right?
That's correct. So we gather around the world in different places. I'll
Yeah.
be in Prague, I'll be in
Yeah.
England, I hope to be
Mm.
in Portugal, and also possibly in Spain, all in this coming fall. Yeah.
Beautiful. So closer to me. That's good to know. Yeah, even though we have technology, and I'm super grateful that I could connect with you today because I've been following your work for years. So it's been, well, such a, yeah, an honor. So thank you so much for spending this hour-ish with me, with us, and sharing everything that you've done and that you're still very active into. So thank you pretty much. And yeah, talk soon.
Thank you and have a great day. And may we get outside and be more nature wherever we are, inside or out.